I never thought I'd be the kind of person to get caught up in office politics. But when David Morgan walked into our marketing firm on that rainy Monday morning, something shifted in the atmosphere of Apex Creative. His confident stride and piercing gaze immediately commanded attention as our director introduced him as the new creative director brought in to elevate our vision. I felt my stomach tighten. That was supposed to be my promotion after 3 years of late nights and sacrificed weekends. "Everyone, please welcome David," announced Sarah, our CEO, with unusual enthusiasm. "He comes to us from Thompson & Wright, where he led their team to 3 industry awards last year. While everyone else applauded, I maintained a polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. I caught David looking directly at me, his expression unreadable as he nodded slightly. Something in that look made me realize he knew exactly whose toes he was stepping on. "Looking forward to working with all of you," he said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed effortless. "I've reviewed the Jenkins campaign materials and have some thoughts I'd like to discuss with the team lead." His eyes found mine again. "Rebecca, right?" I straightened my posture. "That's right. My team has been managing that account for over a year." "Perfect. Let's meet after the morning briefing." The following hours were a blur of introductions and small talk, but all I could think about was defending my work against this interloper. By the time we sat down in the small conference room, I had rehearsed every defense for every creative decision we'd made. What I wasn't prepared for was what he said as soon as the door closed behind us. "I know you were in line for my position," he stated plainly, setting his portfolio on the table. "And from what I've seen of your work, you deserved it. Subscribe for more workplace confessions." That caught me off guard. I'd prepared for condescension, not acknowledgement. "Then why are you here?" The words slipped out before I could filter them. David ran a hand through his dark hair and leaned back. "Because Sarah didn't just want the Jenkins campaign refreshed. She wants the entire agency repositioned." He slid a folder across the table. "These are the numbers your CEO hasn't shared with the team yet." Inside were projections showing Apex losing market share to 3 newer agencies. Our client retention had dropped 18% in 6 months. "She could have told me this," I said, flipping through the alarming data. "I could have handled it." "Politics," David replied with a slight shrug. "Bringing in an outsider is easier than telling your star employee the ship is sinking." I closed the folder, studying him carefully. "And you're what? Our life raft?" "I'm a strategic move. New blood, fresh perspective, industry connections." He leaned forward. "But I need your team's talent and institutional knowledge, particularly yours." Over the following week, I watched David operate with calculated precision. He sat in on every department meeting, asked insightful questions, and spent late evenings reviewing our entire portfolio. Despite my initial resistance, I found myself respecting his approach, until the Jenkins presentation. Our biggest client had requested new campaign concepts, and my team had spent weeks developing 3 solid pitches. David had reviewed them all, offering minimal feedback. "These are good," was all he'd said. But as we sat in the boardroom waiting for the clients to arrive, David placed a 4th concept board on the easel. "What is that?" I whispered, feeling my pulse quicken. "Insurance," he murmured. "Trust me." Before I could protest, the Jenkins team arrived, and the presentation began. My team members presented our concepts professionally, receiving polite nods and a few clarifying questions. Then David unveiled his concept, a complete departure from the client's conservative branding history. It was bold, borderline risky, with messaging that challenged industry norms. I held my breath, certain we were about to lose our biggest account. Instead, Jenkins' marketing director leaned forward, eyes lighting up. "This is exactly what we've been trying to articulate internally." He turned to his colleagues. "This positions us against Next Gen perfectly." By the time the clients left, they had selected David's concept unanimously. The office buzzed with excitement. Sarah pulled David into her office, beaming with approval. I stayed behind in the conference room, gathering materials and processing what had just happened. The concept was brilliant, I couldn't deny that. But the fact that he had developed it separately, without involving my team, stung like a betrayal. "You could have brought us in on that," I said when he returned. The room was empty now, evening shadows stretching across the table between us. David closed the door. I couldn't risk it being watered down by committee. My team isn't a committee. We're professionals who have been giving Jenkins what they ask for, not what they need. His tone remained even, not accusatory, which somehow made it worse. "You've been playing it safe because you can't afford to lose them." I felt heat rising to my face. "That's not fair." "It's exactly what Sarah told me when she hired me." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "The board is considering downsizing the creative department if we don't turn things around in the next quarter." The revelation hit me like cold water. She wouldn't. She's already started planning which positions to eliminate. His eyes held mine. "Including yours." I struggled to process this information. How had I missed the signs? Had I been so focused on my creative responsibilities that I'd overlooked the business realities? "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. David was close enough now that I could detect his subtle cologne. "Because despite what you think, I didn't come here to replace you. I came here to save this agency." He paused. "And I can't do that without you." The silence between us hummed with tension. Professional boundaries suddenly seemed to blur as I realized how intently he was watching me, waiting for my response. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His lips curved into a slight smile. "A partnership, off the books, outside of Sarah's oversight. You know the clients, the team's strengths. I know how to push beyond safe creative." "And what does this partnership look like?" "Late nights, weekend strategy sessions, complete honesty between us, even when it's uncomfortable." He picked up a pen from the table, turning it between his fingers, "and absolute discretion." Something about the way he said it made me wonder what else this partnership might entail. The rational part of my brain was sending warning signals about office politics and professional complications. But another part was intrigued by the challenge, and by the unexpected alliance with the man I'd viewed as my rival. "If we do this, we do it my way with my team," I countered. "No more surprise presentations." "Your team, absolutely. Your way?" He smiled again. That's what got Apex into this situation. I should have been offended, but the truth in his statement was undeniable. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Need to see you first thing tomorrow. Important discussion about department restructuring." I looked up to find David watching my reaction. "She's starting already, isn't she?" He nodded once. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide where you stand, Rebecca." He gathered his things and headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "For what it's worth, I fought to keep your position safe." As the door closed behind him, I sat alone in the conference room, the weight of the decision before me growing heavier by the second. Whatever I chose would change everything, not just for my career, but for everyone on my team. And despite every professional instinct warning me against it, I couldn't shake the feeling that trusting David might be my only option. I barely slept that night. By morning, dark circles shadowed my eyes as I stared at my reflection, questioning every career decision that had led me to this crossroads. I arrived at the office early, determined to beat Sarah and review the company financials myself. The quiet of the empty office felt oppressive as I dug through quarterly reports and client contracts. "Looking for something specific?" I startled at David's voice. He stood in the doorway of the small file room, 2 coffee cups in hand. "Evidence," I replied, accepting the offered coffee. "That Sarah isn't just using you as a convenient executioner." "Find anything?" I sighed, gesturing at the spread of documents. "Client billing is down 22% year over year. Our biggest accounts are paying less while demanding more. And overhead? Unchanged." I rubbed my temples. The math doesn't work. David nodded, leaning against the doorframe. So what are you going to do? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Sarah was looking. For me? Guess it's showtime, I murmured, straightening my blouse and gathering my resolve. David's hand caught my arm as I moved to pass him. Whatever she offers you, don't accept immediately. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment I felt like we were the only two people in the building, united against an invisible threat. I nodded once and headed for Sarah's office. Her assistant waved me in immediately. Sarah sat behind her immaculate desk, a folder open before her. Rebecca, thanks for coming. In early. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Please, sit. What followed was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. Sarah praised my contributions while explaining the necessary evolution of our creative department. She outlined a new structure that would effectively demote me to senior creative strategist under David's leadership. We value your institutional knowledge, she emphasized. This isn't a step down. It's a lateral move that allows you to focus on what you do best. Creating award-winning campaigns that have kept this agency afloat? I replied evenly. Sarah's smile tightened. The market is changing, and we need fresh perspectives. David brings connections and visibility that can elevate everyone's work, including mine, especially yours. She slid a document across the desk. The compensation package reflects our commitment to your continued growth with Apex. The number on the page surprised me, a modest increase rather than the cut I'd expected. I remembered David's warning not to accept immediately. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'd like some time to consider it. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. Of course, though we're announcing the reorganization at tomorrow's all-hands meeting. I'll have my answer by end of day, I promised, rising to leave. Rebecca, she called as I reached the door. David speaks very highly of your abilities. This partnership could be good for both of you. I nodded noncommittally and left, my mind racing with possibilities and suspicions. David was waiting by my office, expression unreadable. How bad? Demotion disguised as a lateral move with a token raise, I replied, closing my office door behind us. But she's announcing the changes tomorrow, ready or not. He exhaled slowly. That's actually better than I expected. She told me they were considering eliminating 3 senior positions entirely, including mine, especially yours. Your salary is one of the highest non-executive compensations. I sank into my chair, the reality sinking in. So my options are demotion or unemployment. Or option 3, David said quietly, sitting across from me. We prove ourselves indispensable, together. There was something in the way he said together that shifted the air between us. For the first time, I allowed myself to really look at him, not as an adversary, but as a potential ally. The intensity in his gaze suggested he was doing the same. What did you have in mind? I asked. The North Star pitch is next week, he said, referring to a major potential client we'd been pursuing for months. Sarah's counting on it to stop the bleeding. The team's been working on concepts for weeks, and they're solid, safe concepts that won't win against the other 4 agencies pitching. He leaned forward. But I have something that will. The sense of déjà vu from the Jenkins presentation made me hesitate. Another solo masterpiece? No. His expression was earnest now. Something we developed together, off the clock, off the books. Just you and me. Why me? Why not work with the whole team? Because I've reviewed everyone's portfolios. You're the only one who's submitted truly innovative concepts in the past year. Concepts that were ultimately watered down or rejected. Stared at him, surprised. You went through my rejected concepts? I make it a point to see what doesn't make it through the approval process. It often reveals more than what does. He held my gaze. Your Aventura tourism campaign concept was brilliant. The mention of that particular rejection stung. I'd poured myself into that pitch, only to have it dismissed as too adventurous for the client. Sarah killed it, I admitted, and lost the account to an agency that pitched something remarkably similar to your original concept. He let that sink in. You've been holding back because she's trained you to. His words resonated uncomfortably. Had I become too cautious? Had years of incremental compromises dulled my creative edge? If we do this, I said slowly, we're potentially undermining Sarah's authority. We're saving the agency she's running into the ground, he countered, and possibly your job. The practical part of me knew he was right. The loyal employee in me felt conflicted. But the creative who had watched her boldest ideas die in committee after committee felt a spark of rebellion ignite. When do we start? I asked. His smile was slow and satisfied. Tonight. My place. Bring the market research and your wildest ideas. Your place? I raised an eyebrow. That's not exactly professional. Neither is corporate espionage, but that's essentially what we're doing. He wrote an address on a post-it and slid it across my desk. 8 p.m. I'll order dinner. After he left, I sat staring at the address, wondering if I was making a catastrophic career mistake or finally taking control of my professional destiny. Either way, the line I'd promised myself never to cross, mixing personal and professional boundaries, was already beginning to blur. That evening, I found myself standing outside David's downtown loft, a portfolio tucked under my arm, and second thoughts clouding my mind. Before I could reconsider, the door opened. You came, he said, something like relief in his tone. The loft was spacious and minimally furnished, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. One entire wall was covered with concept boards and market analysis printouts. You've been busy, I observed, taking in the comprehensive breakdown of the North Star account. I like to be prepared. He handed me a glass of wine, especially when the stakes are this high. For the next few hours, we dissected the client's needs, their competitors' weaknesses, and the market gaps no one was addressing. Our conversation flowed easily, professional respect gradually evolving into genuine creative chemistry. By midnight, surrounded by takeout containers and dozens of sketched concepts, we developed something I genuinely believed could win the account. More importantly, I felt creatively alive in a way I hadn't in years. This could actually work, I admitted, stretching tired shoulders. It will work, David insisted, his eyes bright with conviction, but only if we present it together. Sarah won't allow that. Sarah won't have a choice if we develop this fully on our own time. He gathered some of the scattered papers. We can claim creative sovereignty. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. You realize this could get us both fired or promoted. He sat beside me on the couch, suddenly serious. Rebecca, I didn't come to Apex to dismantle careers. I came because I saw an agency with untapped potential struggling under outdated leadership. You mean Sarah? I mean an entire executive approach that stifles innovation in the name of safety. His voice dropped lower, including the way they've held you back. There was something disarming about his directness, the way he seemed to see through the professional facade I'd maintained for years. Why do you care about my career? I asked quietly. His gaze held mine steadily. Because talent like yours shouldn't be sidelined by corporate politics. He hesitated, then added, and because I've followed your work for years. The Aventura concept wasn't the only one of yours I admired from afar. The revelation that he'd known of me before coming to Apex shifted something fundamental between us. This wasn't just about saving jobs or winning accounts anymore. You should have told me, I said. Would you have believed me? Or would you have seen it as manipulation? He had a point. I would have questioned his motives even more than I already had. As the silence stretched between us, I became acutely aware of how close we were sitting, how late it had become, how far we'd strayed from conventional professional boundaries. "It's getting late," I finally said, gathering my things. "We should continue this tomorrow." David nodded, but made no move to create distance between us. "Same time tomorrow?" I hesitated, knowing I was standing at a precipice. The sensible choice was to pull back, to insist on meeting at the office, to reinstate professional parameters. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'll bring dinner this time." As I left his loft and stepped into the cool night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened with the North Star pitch, my relationship with David, and my future at Apex, had already been irreversibly altered. The next week passed, in a blur of late nights and stolen moments. By day, I played the part of the reluctantly demoted team leader, nodding through Sarah's announcements and reassuring my concerned team members. By night, David and I crafted what I genuinely believed was the most innovative campaign of my career. Working with him challenged me in ways I hadn't experienced in years. He pushed back on ideas I would have normally abandoned, excavating concepts until they revealed unexpected brilliance. I found myself doing the same with his work, our creative friction generating something neither of us could have produced alone. The night before the North Star pitch, we finalized our presentation in David's loft. The energy between us had been building steadily, a tension that went beyond creative collaboration. "They're going to choose this," David said confidently, surveying our work spread across his living room. "It's undeniable, if Sarah lets us present it," I reminded him. We'd agreed to reveal our alternative concept at the last internal review meeting tomorrow, giving the team just enough time to absorb it before the client pitch. "She won't have a choice," he replied. "Not once everyone sees it." I gathered my jacket, preparing to leave. "Then I guess tomorrow determines everything." David walked me to the door, stopping just short of opening it. "Whatever happens, Rebecca, these past days working with you?" He hesitated, something uncharacteristically vulnerable in his expression. "This is why I came to Apex." The intensity in his eyes made my heart race. We stood there, the professional line we'd carefully maintained suddenly gossamer thin. "David," I started, not entirely sure what I was going to say. His hand brushed my arm, a touch that could still be interpreted as collegial, yet felt anything but. "We should get some rest. Big day tomorrow." I nodded and stepped back, grateful for the reprieve from a decision I wasn't ready to make. "Good night, David." Sleep eluded me that night as I rehearsed every possible scenario for the next day. By morning, I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired, changing my outfit 3 times before settling on a charcoal suit that projected the confidence I needed to borrow. The office was unusually quiet when I arrived. Lisa, one of my team designers, intercepted me at the elevator. "Sarah's looking for you," she whispered. "She seems upset." My stomach dropped. "Did she say why?" Lisa shook her head, but she's been in early meetings with the partners all morning. I thanked her and headed straight to Sarah's office, steeling myself. Her assistant waved me in immediately. Sarah wasn't alone. 2 board members sat with her, their expressions grave. "Rebecca?" Sarah's voice was clipped. "Close the door." As I did, I noticed the material spread across her desk. Our North Star pitch concept boards. "Want to explain this?" she asked, tapping the presentations we'd spent nights developing. I kept my expression neutral. "It appears to be our North Star pitch concept." "Your concept," she corrected. "Developed outside approved channels without proper oversight." "It's a collaborative project," I replied carefully. David and I felt the original concepts weren't strong enough to win the account. "David denies any involvement," said one of the board members, a silver-haired man whose name I struggled to recall. "Says you developed this independently and against direct instructions." The words hit me like a physical blow. I fought to keep my composure as my mind raced to process this betrayal. That's not possible, I said slowly. We worked on this together, at his apartment. I can prove it. Sarah's expression shifted from anger to something like pity. Rebecca, there's no record of any approved collaboration between you two on this project. No emails, no meeting notes, nothing in the project management system. Because he suggested, we keep it off the books. I insisted, hearing how it sounded even as the words left my mouth. The female board member exchanged glances with Sarah. Ms. Chen, David came to us this morning concerned about your response to the reorganization. He suggested you might be trying to undermine his leadership by developing competing pitches. That's absurd, I said, anger rising. This was his idea from the start. Sarah slid a document across the desk. We're placing you on administrative leave, pending an investigation into insubordination and misuse of company resources. I stared at the paper, shock turning to fury. Where is he? Mr. Morgan is briefing the team on the approved North Star presentation, Sarah replied. A presentation your actions have now jeopardized. I need to speak with him. That would be inadvisable, the male board member interjected. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. This couldn't be happening. After everything we'd shared, the late nights, the creative breakthrough, the growing trust, had it all been calculated manipulation? At least let me address my team, I pleaded. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, then you need to leave the premises. The walk to the conference room felt like a march to execution. Through the glass walls, I could see David standing at the head of the table, my team gathered around him. Their expressions ranged from confusion to concern. I pushed open the door, and all conversation ceased. Rebecca, David said smoothly, surprise perfectly calibrated in his tone. We weren't expecting you this morning. Clearly, I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. I wanted to say goodbye to my team before I leave. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the room. I've been placed on administrative leave, I continued, looking at each team member's face. Apparently for developing unauthorized concepts with Mr. Morgan here, concepts he now denies any knowledge of. David's expression remained neutral. Rebecca, this isn't the appropriate forum for personal grievances. It's exactly the right forum, I countered, moving to the laptop connected to the presentation screen. Since this affects everyone in this room. Before anyone could stop me, I plugged in my flash drive and opened a folder. But instead of the North Star presentation, I pulled up something else entirely. Screen recordings I'd quietly made during our late-night sessions, showing David and me clearly working together on the disputed concepts. I learned long ago to document everything, I said, as the video played silently behind me. A habit from having my ideas appropriated before. The color drained from David's face as he realized what I was showing. Your administrative leave may be warranted, I continued, addressing the room rather than him. But not for the reasons given. Judge for yourselves who's been honest with you. I ejected my drive and walked toward the door, pausing beside David. You were right about one thing, I whispered. It was never about the promotion. As I left, Sarah and the board members stood frozen in the hallway, having witnessed everything through the glass walls. I believe we need to reconsider the situation, the female board member said tightly. 3 hours later, I sat in my apartment, alternating between fury and despair, when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Ms. Chen? A woman's voice I recognized as the female board member. This is Diane Blackwood. The board would like to meet with you tomorrow morning. To formalize my termination? I asked bitterly. To discuss your future with the company. A pause. And Mr. Morgan's lack thereof. The next morning, I learned the full story. David had been hired not by Sarah, but by the board, specifically to identify why the agency was losing clients and revenue. His mission had been to assess all departments and recommend structural changes. What he didn't tell us, Diane explained. In the boardroom, Sarah noticeably absent. was that he'd identified the leadership as the primary problem months ago. He's been working his own agenda since arriving. Which was what, exactly? I asked. Based on documents we've recovered, to orchestrate a situation where he could assume control of creative operations completely. The male board member, Peter, I now recalled, looked deeply uncomfortable, using your response as justification. And the North Star pitch was indeed brilliant, Diane acknowledged. But he presented it to us as evidence of your insubordination, not collaboration. The irony might have been amusing if it hadn't nearly cost me my career. So where does this leave Apex? And me? Sarah has been asked to step down, Peter said, bluntly. The board believes a change in leadership is long overdue, and we'd like to discuss your interest in assuming the position of creative director, Diane added. With appropriate support and resources, of course. The offer was everything I'd worked toward for years, finally within reach because of the very person who'd tried to destroy my credibility. I'll need complete creative autonomy, I said, surprising myself with my boldness, and final approval on all new creative hires. Diane smiled slightly. I think that can be arranged. Later that day, I watched from my new office, Sarah's former space, as David was escorted from the building. Our eyes met briefly through the glass, his expression unreadable. Had any of it been real? The creative connection? The late-night conversations? The undeniable chemistry? Or had every moment been calculated to manipulate me into exactly the reaction he'd needed? I would never know. But as I turned back to my desk, where the North Star presentation sat ready for tomorrow's pitch, I realized it didn't matter. Whatever his intentions, David Morgan had inadvertently given me exactly what I needed: the courage to fight for my ideas, the confidence to challenge authority, and most importantly, the proof that my creative instincts had been right all along. Next day, my team and I presented our concept to North Star. They signed with us before leaving the building. As for David, I heard he landed at a competing agency within weeks. Sometimes I wonder if he's tried the same strategy there, or if perhaps our collaboration taught him something too. Either way, I keep my screen recording software updated. Some workplace lessons you only need to learn once. Subscribe for more workplace confessions and leave a like if you enjoyed this story. What would you have done in Rebecca's situation?